Hello, good afternoon and welcome. Hi, everyone. Please put in the chat where you're calling in from today. Welcome to the TPS Talent People Success Ask the Analyst session. David, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, a bit murky and cloudy here in North Hampshire in the UK. Yeah, it's a bit miserable really, but you never know when the sun might pop out. How about
True.
you?
Similar-ish in Bristol.
Yeah.
Allegedly no rain, but you never can tell these days.
Wow,
But
exactly.
no, we're okay. Yeah, we're going to
But
kick off. Sorry, carry on.
no, I was just going to say, I'll let you carry on. I was just trying not to interrupt you, and I managed to. So apologies.
We're going to kick off the Ask the Analyst session properly in a couple of minutes. But while we're waiting, do add where you're calling in from today. I'm just going to switch. Hello from France. Marie, hello. I'm just going to switch connections momentarily.
Hey, Claire Marie, thanks for joining us today. I think we're still a little bit ahead of schedule, aren't we, really? So still plenty of time for people to join us. Hi Ian, thanks for joining us. Good to see you on the call. Hi Julia, thanks for joining us. We're going to wait a few minutes before we begin. But if you want to say hello in the chat, that's where we're picking up the questions a little bit later. So I'll just make sure it's all working okay. Always a paranoid moment that as people come in, they aren't able to ask questions, which is really what it's all about. Hope the weather's good in being kind to you in Devon. Been a bit wet and miserable here. I'm sure you're not missing the southeast. Wish you got an early start. Appreciate that. So maybe it's a normal start, not too early. We're about 5 hours behind, so maybe 6, if they let us know.
Yeah, appreciate you tuning in, Julia.
Yeah. But this is your opportunity to ask questions of us. So you can use this a little bit later on. And I know John's managed to purloin some questions from other people who before we set up the session. So he's got a few burning questions in his pocket. But yeah, we give special dispensation for early joiners to get their questions in fast as well. Hi Jessica, hi Philippa, hi James, thanks for joining us.
Before we get into it fully, a little sneak preview, David. There's a few surprises, I'd say, in the grid.
Oh, I was trying not to make too many. But I think you're right. I think it's continuing to evolve, and I think that's one of the most interesting things. It's quite a dynamic market and a lot of momentum around some interesting players. Yeah, it's quite a diverse grid in a way, and probably different from some of the others that we create.
Yeah. Shall we kick
Hi
off
Alex,
in
hi
earnest?
Alberto,
Do that.
hi Fiona. Are we going to start? Sorry, I was too busy
Yeah.
saying hello. Hi Amy.
No, that's good. Making people feel welcome. And we'll kick off. So we've got
Cool.
plenty of time for questions at the end.
Yeah.
We do like to run these sessions, the majority of them as the Q&A and, 15 to 20 minutes where we go through the 9 grid and everything. So I will start my script. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Ask the Analyst session for the 2024 Fosway 9 grid for talent and people success. I'm John Kennard, Content Editor at Fosway Group, Europe's #1 HR industry analyst, and I will be your host for today's session. So, founded in 1996, Fosway Group provides in-depth corporate research on next-gen HR talent and learning practices. We provide analyst and advisory services to more than 3,000 European and international headquartered multinationals and as well as independent vendor research. And let me tell you about Fosway Corporate Membership, one of our newest services. The FCM is an invite-only network for HR, learning and talent leaders, offering privileged access to the data and insights that sit behind the 9-grid and realities research, as well as automatic booking privileges for our roundtable program, the opportunity to book time with a member of our analyst team as well. There's plenty more besides this, so do contact us afterwards if you're interested in learning more. So this year's research shows that despite economic instability, the talent tech market remains resilient, with some providers achieving up to 100% revenue growth. Key focus areas for talent and people success in 2024 include employee experience, AI-driven personalization, workforce intelligence, plenty more that we will get into. So I'm delighted to welcome Chief Insights Officer and lead analyst on this research, David Perring, to dissect and discuss all the findings in this latest iteration of the Talent and People Success 9-grid. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. We will have a Q&A session at the end. I will gather up all these questions and ask them chronologically as best I can. There's some introductory content to explain how we get to where we are with each 9-grid, the fascinating and incredible amount of detail that goes into producing these reports. And yeah, I'll ask David your questions at the end. So with that said, David, it's over to you to kind of explain a little bit about how we get there.
We've been doing 9-grids. Came up with the concept for them about 2009, I think it was, 2010. So it's something that we've been playing with as a concept for a long time. And we launched our one specifically around this 9-grid, or probably about 2015. But we've been doing them for other segments, including learning systems, as probably as our starting one since about 2012. So that's something that we have been doing in terms of profiling the markets, specifically around talent systems, digital learning, cloud HR, talent acquisition, and talent and people success, as we call this segment. And originally that would have been talent management, but there's been so many changes in this area that we thought it was good to rename it about 4 years ago into a new dimension. Our effort that we put into pulling these together, we try and create a 360 view of the marketplace. So we get input from our corporate research network. So we do roundtables, we do great conversations with clients around their experience of their providers and their solutions, the success they're able to garner through those. We also do surveys of clients as well, or customers of those providers as well, to get understanding almost in a numeric way of where they sit. And we also sit in on events and webinars, and we do specific briefings with providers as well. And on top of that, if that wasn't enough, we also effectively do a micro, I'll call it, well, actually it's not a micro because it's about 500 lines long, a detailed RFI response from each of the providers that we reach out to as well, which gives us a really overall. So all that starts to come together around sort of structured data capture, as you might call it, and we're always listening. So there's always some really interesting conversations going on with some of our great research member networks from across all sectors, really, enterprise organizations, as well as the user conferences and other things. So just like going to Unleash, right? Last week we get so much input and insight from customers around how things are going, and we try to distill that into our analysis in the grid. So Ian, if you want to skip on. So the people that we include on a grid, we don't just randomly pick people and people don't pay to be on the grid. What we do is we talking to large corporates and enterprise organizations, try and get a sense of who's of interest to them. And effectively it's who are they looking at, who are they shortlisting, who are they putting through a selection process, and who are they choosing? And organizations that sort of fall into those buckets that are sort of of interest to European global enterprises are the ones that we try to include on the grid. Sometimes there's a little bit of a lag between us trying to track enough insight and enough voice of the customer before they get included. But most of the providers, actually all the providers that we put onto these grids, are interesting choices for large enterprise corporates to make and even mid-sized enterprise organizations to make as well. And that's probably a good summary. I don't know if I've missed anything out there, John. I think that's probably a fair description. I'll take a nod.
Say so.
Yeah, cool. So the primary analysis point and what shapes this is really what customers say. So I geek out quite often when I get to see what vendors are up to, and I get super excited about what people are doing, and that has to be moderated. And for me, and maybe less so for others of our analysts, it's actually talking to the customers that gives me a sense of not that this was a really nice thing on paper, but it's really driving value for the buyers. So that's our primary sort of North Star. And whatever a vendor says is almost secondary input. We tend to use it as a highlight for interrogation. So if a vendor says they're particularly good at doing something in our functional feedback review, said 500 lines, and they pick out something as being market leading, typically that'll be the sorts of things we'll say to them, oh, do show us more. And it'll also then become a highlight for conversations with customers to say, this is pretty new. Are you been using it? How's it going? So we do, I suppose, overall try and sort of take a hard view of where the market is in terms of what vendors say they provide. We also try and get a strong sense of what buyers are using and the success they're getting to, and almost trying to sit very clearly on the fence to understand if something went wrong, was that to do with actually just an unlucky implementation by the vendor, or was it actually unfortunate implementation by the buyer? There's lots of fingers that can be pointed, and we're just trying to get a sense of what the reality of that is. So next slide, and I can't remember what's on the next slide. Oh, yes. If you have not downloaded the full report, please look at the full report. Usually people get carried away by the thing that's on the left-hand side, which is the grid itself. As I said, we've got about 5 of them. I'd love to do more, but we don't have the resources. I'd love to do one for performance. I'd love to do one for skills only. There's so many things I'd love to do. But this one focused purely on talent and people success. We cover the key market trends, so distill the conversations with providers and buyers around where they see the market going, get a sense from our inquiry into where the costs are, the revenue that organizations are making from selling these solutions. But we also try and give you a sense of what the solution trends are as well. And that just really gives you a nice way of sense. It's giving a sense of, so where is the market going in terms of the solutions itself? It's also worth having a look at the table. We've included some extra things in terms of the commentaries around the different providers. This year we've included some things around their trajectory, and there's some lovely words that have been pulled together which give an explanation of why somebody is positioned in a particular space on the grid. Each of the, 9 places that they could exist has their own label now, and that's worth having a look through. And we also have highlighted the TCO, so you can get a nice view or a comparison between those at a higher cost and those at a lower cost. And we've also separated out those that are suite providers and those that are specialist providers as well, along with other information as well. So do have a look through, do download the full report. Usually there's something interesting in there that you can use to ask a question around. But it is more than a diagram. So this is the grid. I'll go through the key headlines and I'll quickly then explain the positionings in the grid itself. So key headlines, I think of all the different dimensions of HR or HR systems, talent and people success is probably one of those areas where we're seeing the most visible and practical use of AI. The only one that maybe surpasses that is talent acquisition. And typically that sort of practical use of AI is sometimes back office. So it's doing the number crunching of who are a good candidate, for example, or what is a good match for this particular skill in terms of learning. Sometimes it's just summarizing the vast amount of employee listening that an organization has managed to gather through their employee engagement platform and providing that high level summary. Like I'm sure you probably got ChatGPT to do the summaries of maybe a particular paragraph or summary or a very long email that somebody might have sent you. We're seeing that probably come through in the talent people success area, probably as much as we're seeing in any other part of HR. And it's a little bit of a trailblazer, probably, as I said, a little bit behind where talent acquisition is, just because the sharp end of selecting and shortlisting is maybe a little bit more advanced. But it's a ripe area, and it covers not only the things around the learning side, it's covering things like performance and summarizing people's performance over the year, making sure you're not avoiding recency. It's supporting things around DE and I providing good advice around actually you shouldn't use the word guys there. You're better off using a different phrase to be more inclusive in the language that you use. It's, as I said, summarizing the vast amounts of employee listening to get a sense of employee sentiment. And it's also picking up a lot to do with skills. And actually, one of the probably key areas that underpins both talent acquisition and talent people success is this sense of organizations wanting to be more skills based. And that is a super hot topic. And one of the things that's interesting about this grid is because there's so many specialists almost building out around that skills theme, you see a lot of squares on here in a way that you don't see maybe in other areas or other languages that we have. Probably another key takeaway is because of the economic headwinds that organizations are facing, there seems to have been quite an interesting focus on how do I create high performing organizations, because I'm expected to do more with less. And as part of that, culture is becoming a key influencer around that. Probably maybe less so in terms of being a hot topic than skills, but it's still a really strong undercurrent. And that has influenced probably many of the things that are on the grid, where organizations are looking for partners around employee engagement, employee listening. The buyer advocacy is exceptionally high, and you'll see that a little bit in the solutions that may be more on the very right-hand side of the grid, people like Perceptics, Culture Amp, WorkHuman, Peakon, Halo, Achievers, because they are so integral to helping maybe flexible working and hybrid working type organizations establish a little bit more of a culture. The level of advocacy from buyers is incredibly high. So it's something to watch out for. There are some great, really interesting providers in that space who are emerging as well. People like PG Mondays, for example, are leading the charge in that space. But it's really interesting, that sort of sense of culture as a key player in performance, especially in this hybrid working environment. The other thing that's probably key is the sense of marketplace and opportunity marketplace. Now, some people talk about that as being a talent marketplace. Opportunity marketplace really probably extends it from being just about jobs into opportunities for assignments or gigs or projects or for mentors. So trying to enable that sort of rich connection of expertise driven by skills quite often to enable organizations to optimize their people, but also on the flip side, provide the career paths that make organizations really attractive to their employees. And that is probably one of the key features of the grid, really, in terms of many of the players that we've got emerging in these boxes, who are sort of swarming towards the top right, are very much in that market opportunity skills, changing the employee experience so that they can feel as though they've got a future in the organization. That's an important part of the analysis, probably, that seeing that trend grow and grow. The other thing on here, just in terms of co-pilots, actually the touch points for HR interaction are changing. And it's fascinating the number of solutions on the grid now that have two access points, both through their front end, but also through Slack or Teams as a touch point into the employee experience. And that changes things significantly. I think it's something that we'll see increasingly change in our HR systems over the next 3 or 4 years. This sense of, it's called a MAC architecture in IT, which stands for microservices. So it's like a specific layer of functionality, be that a career recommendation, for example. A in the Mac architecture, that's the M for in Mac architecture. A stands for API first. So that's the connection, the integration point across solutions. C stands for cloud. So actually, it's difficult. Actually, I don't think there's anybody on the grid who's not a cloud player. So that's pretty much a given. And the final one, and this comes back to this sense of co-pilots changing HR's interaction, is headless. And that gives you MAC as an acronym. But headless means that actually you don't go into the originating system, you access or interface with the solution somewhere else using the API to call a microservice. And that is sort of thing that you effectively, when somebody says, oh, I've got a recommendation through a Copilot, that is what's happening in the back end. And that's going to change a lot of the experience around things like employee listening. It will change things around recommendations for learning. It will change things around recommendations for jobs. It will change pretty much anything. Assessment of skills, I think we'll increasingly see the solutions go to the individual rather than the individual going to the solution, if that makes sense. And finally, linking people to business intelligence. The key challenge, probably both for, let's think about it, core cloud HR and any HR process that we've captured on the talent and people success slide, is the proofing point of, does this make a difference to the business? Does engagement drive higher results, higher performance? Does what we manage in our performance management and creating better alignment between OKRs and our leaders and their people to those big, hairy, audacious goals, does that drive better outcomes? And the clean line of sight between a skills-based organization and higher performance is still a little bit murky because we haven't joined the people intelligence to the business intelligence. And I think maybe the next boundary that hopefully we will cross in the next 5 years, maybe sooner if we're lucky, is that transparency of these HR practices are driving these sorts of outcomes for our organization, and surfacing that both to leaders, managers, but also individuals themselves so they can make better choices. So that's a high-level view of the key headlines. What I will do, John, before we take questions is just say, just to summarize how these things work. When we think about the axes on the 9 grid, this area that says potential on the left, what we're thinking about is not only the systems capability, but also the service capability. So those who are higher up the list tend to have a more global footprint, or they tend to have and they also have broader, richer functionality, which comes with its own complexities. On performance, the thing that's going left to right, the people on the right tend to have what we call about being higher performance. So they get shortlisted more often, they get more traction with and bought by enterprise EMEA corporates, and their customers are strong advocates. And for anybody who's placed on a grid, there's always value in choosing a provider, even if on the left-hand side, as a broad rule of thumb, those on the left are yet to break into the market in a big way. Sometimes they will over-deliver because they want to prove themselves. And likewise, guys in the middle, right? So it's not always about trying to choose top right. Top right are the big hairy gorillas who are doing this a lot. And sometimes you get a more playful interaction and don't get pushed around by smaller players who are eager for your business, who want to be the market or strategic market leader. The other thing just to say is in terms of the colors, the blue is total cost of ownership. That is a higher total cost of ownership, and that covers the full buying cycle. So your discovery, your shortlisting, your implementation, and then running it as business as usual, and also access to innovation. The blue ones tend to charge you more at each one of those things. And sometimes they're blue because actually they're complex solutions to deploy. And actually, they take a lot more effort to maintain and run on an ongoing basis. So it's actually the back office that maybe is a challenge to keep it running and keep it moving. Maybe one exception to that is maybe some of the guys around Workhuman, Achievers, Reward Gateway. Actually, they're not, what's the word, maybe a high overheads, but we're trying to just represent the fact that overall they are higher cost because they tend to take a percentage of what would otherwise be employee salary costs. So the number tends to be bigger. We don't want to create too much of a shock when you go and say, how much? When we do that one. People who are orange are sort of mid-level, maybe sort of getting close to premium pricing, but not quite. And then the green are the ones who are lower pricing in terms of lower total cost of ownership, simpler solutions, easier to deploy, less effort overall. And that's a quick, maybe a quick summary. So, John, I've written on for too long probably, but maybe that's a useful thing. So I suppose we're into that place of, well, what do people want to know?
Yeah. Thanks, David. Just also to say that I think total cost of ownership, or TCO as we would have it, as
Yeah.
we repeat this word or phrase many, many times, is something that we are sort of looking to focus on a bit more and explain to people a bit more, because it's something that perhaps people overlook or don't understand properly. So thank you very much for that explanation earlier. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Maybe, John, that'd be worth plugging the Knowledge Centre. I can see it's been sort of mentioned in the chat on the left-hand side. I know Ian and you have been doing an amazing job of building that out with over 100, was it 100
We are now, yes.
items? Wow. One of those
Yeah,
items, if you use a search, I think will cover some really interesting breakdown of the TCO. So if there is a link that we could drop in, maybe people can have a quick peek. Not that I want you to leave the room now, but
yeah. I would like to turn this into an ATA about the knowledge centre, but yeah, I mean,
I think we should.
it's it's a way of kind of collating all the papers and insights and viewpoints of our analyst team that have been produced over the years. And there's a couple of good explainers about the 9 grid introductions. We talk about trajectory as well. That's another big thing,
Yeah.
a huge part of the way these things are put together. But to ask a question about this one, first off, it strikes me that there's a huge concentration of specialists in the strategic leader zone. What's that about? Because does it
Yeah.
mean that suites kind of aren't
Unusual.
performing in that respect? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think that's a really strong observation, right? It's something that I think when we created this category of talent and people success, in some ways it's so huge. It covers almost every part of the employee life cycle, from talent acquisition through to onboarding, and then performance and goal setting, and then to learning, and then into employee listening and engagement and succession and talent mobility and award and recognition and offboarding and employee listening. So, and then you get out, right? Or internal mobility. So it's a really broad category. And what I think we've realized is, and if I go back a step, one of the seeds for that, where it grew from, was this sense probably about 10 years ago about having talent management as a concept. Integrated talent management is what we used to call this grid. But I think what we've realized very sort of quickly, 3 or 4 years on, was actually the landscape was changing. It was much more about employee enablement. It was much more about employee empowerment or talent empowerment. And the management label was maybe a little bit too narrow. That created its own challenges then, because what we did is sort of broaden it out. And now we've included people who are very niche, who actually traditionally some of the suite providers like Cornerstone, Avature, or Segid have never really got to grips with. And I'd pick out an example of that being Perceptics, Culture Amp, and Workhuman, who very broadly you could say are around the employee culture, employee listening, relationship management with managers. And you get that with the guys at I think people like Peacon as well, probably worth calling out. So that whole employee listening discipline actually the suites have struggled to deliver that with the quality, depth, and sophistication that those specialists have been able to bring to it. And that means that these guys are always part of the mix. If you look at a cloud HR solution, they typically then add on employee listening within an enterprise organization around those Halo achievers, culture amp. They all sort of fit into that mold of offering something that actually suite providers in the cloud HR have never really been able to succeed with. And a lot of that is because it's such a specialist domain. You're almost, when you're buying those solutions, also buying the IP of those providers, data scientists, their organizational behavioral scientists, their execution methodology, which is much maybe potentially more challenging overall. So that they sort of stand out as one group. The other group that's probably picked out, and I'll pick out Topia as one sort of maybe oddity, is Topia focus purely on global talent mobility. So relocation, working across borders, being their unique thing. You don't get that anywhere else. Again, the enablement and the customer feedback around those providers is really high because they're offering such a niche service. And the final three that I'll pick out, Eightfold, Phenom, and Glow, these guys are really focused around AI-enabled skills-based organizations and skills enablement. So they are the providers of opportunity marketplace, talent mobility, careers at scale, skills intelligence at scale, both inside your organization and outside your organization, to give you a total view of the talent landscape in your industry. Probably the criticism that we'd have had of Cornerstone, SAP, Cegid being the suite providers of the past is that they were really slow to get on board with skills. And guys like Gloat have been doing this since about 2015. So their ability to bring innovation to the market, disrupt the market, and change it from being talent management into talent enablement is really significant. The guys like NeoBrain and 365 Talents, another two different French providers, Fuel 50 from New Zealand, they have driven some really interesting niche expertise around skills. And that's probably what's sort of at the heart of the number of squares that are here. They offer maybe very specific solutions in a space where it's becoming maybe increasingly hard to be a talent suite.
Thank you, David. One thing we also should pick out is about skills and skills-based organizations. Should buyers be waiting for cloud HR systems to deliver on skills, or
So
what's
good
your...
point. That is the uppercut, I think, of the punch. Like you threw the left arm and then you caught me on the up one. That's a really good question. And I think what we've seen with some of the providers from the suite side is let's pick out Cornerstone, right? Historically, maybe 5 years ago, they bought into a solution called Clustery to try and grow their capability around skills. Didn't quite bite. They've recently bought Skyhive to bolster their capability. SAP at this time have built out some functionality this year. They're making big promises for what 2025 brings. So they are maturing and they're bringing that forward. Cegid are in the process of turning their huge oil tanker around in terms of maneuvering their organization to actually enable us to, or enable themselves to offer a stronger skills story. So probably the key message has been over the last, let's say, 8-9 years is that if you wanted to do skills and you wanted to create and work down a skills-based organization route, actually it's the Eightfolds, it's the Cornerstones, maybe it's the NeoBrains, it's the 365 Talents, it's the Gloats who have had the strongest case studies. They have been the reference organizations, or providers who've been able to demonstrate with their clients how to make this work. And I think that's probably been the story up to this year, and I think it'll probably be the story for the next 2 years. The challenge comes, and it's probably the hard end of that punch, is what happens when your gloat contract or your eightfold contract or your phenom contract comes up for renewal in 3 years' time. Will SAP, Workday, will Cornerstone have matured enough to disrupt the people who've been owning that space that I mentioned already? Yes, difficult one. I think it's still a little bit vaporware in a way for some of those providers in terms of being a cloud HR provider who can offer that richness that you've got within some of these specialists. But there is already really pointed questions being asked by HR leads for IT of, we bought Workday or we bought SAP. We're running out on our contract, say for eightfold in a year's time. Why am I going to have two systems that do the same thing? So I think if you are interested in what's high performing, what's really making a difference, what's got a track record, actually it tends to be the square boxes on this grid who do things around skills. As I said, the NeoBrains, the like we got, and even the guys like Profinder, etc. They've got a heritage of making this successful. If you want to have some body armor that protects you from the IT team saying, well, I've got two systems, you'll need to have shown some really strong business value. And again, that's one of the weaknesses, probably across all HR systems, of being able to show that really significant business impact. Because if you challenge it on cost, you're toast. You've got to be able to differentiate on the value that you're driving within your organization. And that value might be in the quality of the experience, his ability to get used. It's not worth spending money on something that doesn't actually get anybody using it. So that you need to have a strong story to counter that. And that's not always as transparent, especially when people like SAP will be delivering more things next year, which we don't even know how good it is or whether it actually works. So sorry to SAP, but it's the this way. Does that answer this question-ish?
I'd say so.
Please add in any observations. If anybody's got some observations, please put them in the chat down further on.
Yeah, please do.
Cool.
And Alberto, thank you for your question around continuous performance management. What are your views about continuous performance management and AI coaching and prompt performance tools? A burgeoning area.
Wow. I think it's a super fascinating area, because when we look at where actually HR are focusing their attention, coaching is not high on the agenda, which is that's just in terms of our maturity. There's back office processes to look after. There's loads of data that we want to crunch and make more accessible to managers and our people, maybe around their sentiment and their feedback, for example. So I think as an early start, we're in that sort of place where AI isn't top of people's minds in the HR space around coaching yet. I think they see that as being something that is human domain, something we should encourage humans to do. But there's some amazing case studies, ones that we haven't included on here. For example, a company called Transfer and Learning have a nice solution called Coach M that just asks people about what are your three biggest challenges. How far are you along in successfully completing those challenges? Where would you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? 3, 4, 5. And then what would you do to move it to maybe in 2 weeks' time to an 8? What would you do? So what that coaching approach is doing is not using AI to provide answers. What it's doing is using AI to ask the right questions, because the purpose of coaching is to develop the inner voice. Now, a lady called Emma Webber, who does the Coach M stuff, she talks all about this, developing the inner voice, and the research they've done shows that people are more willing to disclose their challenges and talk realistically about how they rate their progress on completing those challenges on a scale of 1 to 10. to a bot than they are to a person. And what they started to do is weave these things together to enable people to get some reflective space, to almost have that inner dialogue using the bot, not giving them answers, and then using that as a springboard on to a human coach or a peer-to-peer coach and mentor. So I think it's going to come in a big way because actually us building our own resilience isn't about necessarily just getting great recognition from other people. It's about building the right patterns of thinking. And I think a bot can help proven to do that. So from a performance management side and AI coaching, I think this is going to be a huge area. We've seen some really interesting things from the guys at Zensei, that they're doing this thing called a weekly 10. Basically, people take a 10-minute reflection on how my objectives are going. The AI hoovers up a manager's team's 10-minute reflections and says, you want to speak to John about this, you want to speak to Jack about that, and I want you to speak to Claire Marie around this. So actually using the power of the AI to help rationalize, absorb, give pointers, I think this is something that is going to grow and grow. I'm old enough, and I'm sure maybe you guys are too young to remember the paperclip from Microsoft's Word and all those Microsoft Office. I think we're going to move beyond that, and I think it's going to be something. Yeah, Jen, that's it, Clippy. Daniel. I think we're going to see something move beyond that, and I think there is something about this, as I said, that sense of touch points and triggers and asking us our opinion. In other spaces, there's solutions related to learning, a company called Drillster, who are estimating how much you would have forgotten on the forgetting curve, and then just giving you a nudge just to say, oh, can you answer this question? And if you can answer it, it knows that you've still got it stuck in your brain. If you've forgotten it, then it will say, oh, you didn't get that one right. You might want to just have a quick read through this. So I think that to me feels like coaching. Now, where we're going with performance, my hope is that around that sort of continuous performance, that is going to be very central to how we think about getting the most out of people. But I twist it a little bit. I think it's about how we nudge people into better relationships with their manager, how we create stronger alignment around goals. And AI has some roles in doing just that, prompting us to say, actually, it's been 2 weeks since I spoke to Jack. Ow, I should have done that last week. What should I be speaking to him about? These are some of the pointers. So I think there's going to be a lot around this, around continuous performance management isn't necessarily in vogue. It seems to be the thing that has never really bitten brilliantly. But having said that, the guys at One Advanced with Clear Review have done a great job. Amazing piece of feedback from one of their customers who said they were walking through the manufacturing floor and they had somebody come up to them and saying, I'm loving what we're doing with performance management. And it was just somebody who worked on a production floor. And it was just bizarre, right? So I think this whole sense of creating a continuous dialogue around achieving goals, the support that we need to get to make things work, and maybe in the future, more team-based collaborative goals is something that I hope we will see grow and grow. The guys at Becom, if I just pick out them, are doing some interesting things, already talking about performance and continuous bonus, which is an interesting concept. So if we've reached target in this month, then you get your bonus assigned that week rather than waiting to the end of the month. So I think there's so much more we can do about this. It's not necessarily top of mind. I think skills-based organizations seems to have stolen more of the limelight. But I love that question.
Thank you, David. And Alberto says thanks as well.
Thank you.
Daniel, question from you. This is more general, I guess, about
Yeah.
production design grids. What kind of questions you get from buyers? How do they dig into the results? This is a very large question, I'd say. What problems are they looking to solve going into 2025? I guess there's going to be some fairly big commonalities and also some specifics depending.
Wow.
on
Yeah. So typically the sort of things that buyers do is they look to the top right and they don't necessarily think broadly enough about all the players on the grid. So When they come to us and we get a chance to influence them, the things that we will say to them is, if you're going through a selection process, and give yourself a good year to run at this before you start even think about signing contracts, and then you've got to implement. But if you're thinking about creating a shortlist, do a shortlist that drives real choices. So we would encourage people to make a selection between providers who are maybe very functionally rich and those that have a lower functional footprint, so they're easier to deploy. Typically, the solutions at the bottom of the grid are faster, leaner, meaner, don't take so much care and maintenance. They can just go probably far without so much overhead. So we would encourage people to make choices to say, okay, choose from the top, choose from the middle, choose from the bottom. So you're actually understanding and getting some insight into what can you as an organization really execute. Because one way to think about potential is like having an extra stone in your rucksack, right? If you've got to carry a bag, every piece of functionality is a rock in that rucksack. The more pieces of functionality you pile in, the more effort it is to move and maintain. And that either means you want to hire a bunch of Sherpas to carry it around for you, or you're going to end up chucking rocks out because it's too heavy, or it just doesn't move and keep pace with your business. So knowing that you've got the right level of resource as a buyer is one way of thinking about, actually, I should choose something from the top, the middle, and the bottom, because that will give me some insight and give me some real choices. And equally, around the total cost of ownership, we would encourage people to say, well, go fill your boots, go for maybe a higher total cost of ownership, understand the value that you want to drive. Do choose a middle cost and a lower cost, because if you end up with three and they're all high cost, you've got very little negotiating space. And that's what we'd say to buyers. Focus on that as an element. The other thing that we say to buyers is, what sort of use case and what sort of experience do you want to develop? And one of the things that's very difficult to sometimes see within a grid is the sort of experience that you are going to give to your employees when you deploy these systems. And sometimes a niche, smaller provider will give you a much slicker, simpler experience that people would love to go back to, rather than something that's overwhelming. So we do give those sorts of advice around making real choices around potential, making real choices around total cost of ownership. The other thing is just in terms of performance and understanding how much of a sort of a risk leader you want to be, or how much you want to be more into some of the disruptive players in the market space. Laszlo Bock used to be the HR director for Google many years ago, said, be careful what HR systems you buy, because your organization's culture will be led by those systems. So if you want to be all the same and you want to be just like everybody else in your segment, in your market sector, in your industry, then you can follow everybody else's choices. If you want to choose something different because you want to go down a slightly different route than everybody else, because you want to create some market differentiation, then sometimes you have to look to the left of the grid. You have to look at maybe a path that is not so well followed. It does come with other overheads around management. Maybe some of these providers on the left are a little bit more US based, so they're looking to grow into Europe, and therefore you need to manage some of their resources more carefully, or make sure they've got their A team coming over to Europe to help you out in the right time zone at the right time. All these things really matter. So that's another thing to sort of think about, I think, when you think about sort of the questions that we get from buyers. We're trying to sort of make them think broadly about the choices that they make. And it's interesting, right? I'll pick out Rejig as an example. Rejig have been doing some really interesting thought leadership around saying skills-based organizations, that's halfway there. What you should be going to are task ontologies, because organizations are really based around tasks. Skills is only half the answer. Task is really important because AI takes away tasks. It changes the nature of your business. So if we understand our task ontology, then we can understand the future shape of work and the skills, therefore, that people need to be able to complete in context. And that's one of the joys of tasks. So you don't really get that answer anywhere else. Like Cast would say, task is a stupid idea. We tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work. So whether that was a timing thing or an experience thing, so actually trying to understand really what you're trying to achieve is one of the things that we also challenge buyers around, because sometimes they have very clear preconceptions about what they're trying to do, follow the pack, rather than thinking what's relevant and would get traction with their stakeholders. So those are some of the things that we do. In terms of some of the digging into the results, we've profiled in this grid and we've mashed it together with the cloud HR grid. We've now got 68 effectively RFP responses around functionality. We can benchmark those. We can show hotspots to buyers. Again, it helps us provide shortlists when they've got maybe a strong sense of what they're trying to achieve themselves or what functionality they're looking for. But I'll go back to that observation I made a little bit earlier on, which is the key thing is not always the functionality, it's the experience. And again, what we try to do with buyers is move them rapidly from this is what the solution says it can do into what's your context and what would be a great use case that you could ask that provider to show you how they'd solve that problem. And that is probably some of the most interesting advice that we give them. And in terms of problems they're looking to solve for 2025, you've got 3 answers there, you're doing well. Skills, 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 performance, engagement, AI, skills, engagement, performance culture. Those are things I pick out. Cool.
Oh, sorry. On mute there. Classic error. So we've still got plenty of time, just under 15 minutes left for more questions. So keep them coming in. David, I wanted to pick out something from the report around total workforce intelligence. I just wanted to see if you could explain that a bit more, and also the role that interoperability plays, because obviously we've got different platforms interacting all the time, and interoperability, I'd imagine, is pretty critical if you want a kind of holistic view of your workforce, right?
To write those 2 things down, that's a big question for my small brain. So you'll have to keep me honest in the answer, right? But I think, so I'll start off with that sort of total people, total talent intelligence. It's a phrase I've made up, and you might think, oh, that's bullshit. But actually, I think it's a useful phrase, because what we have at the moment in many of these systems and solutions, and probably is true for Workday as an SAP in the cloud HR side, is we have quite a lot of siloed view of our people. And probably nowhere is that more true than with skills. So Tech Wolf guys, the Beamery guys, the HR Forecast guys, and if I pick out the Illumi guys maybe as well, probably less so. These guys have been focusing around skills intelligence, and they have that one-dimensional view. And I'm sure we would all be totally affronted if all that people took away from us was a checklist and a rating and ranking of skills. There's so much more that we bring to work, to life. So I think what we're sort of seeing to some extent is this high-load view, and I use skills as that example, as that touchstone, gives us a one-dimensional view. And we know people are 3D, not in this view. We have to meet them at conferences to hold their hand and start to get the real 3D view. But what I think we're moving to, and this is one of the interesting things that Culture Amp has been doing most recently, and probably Peakon, because they're part of Workday. They've been trying to join up other data sources to things like how people feel, the sentiment analysis of the organization, the employee engagement. And I think that's this sort of sense of, if we want to really understand our people, we probably need to try to link up all those data sources so that we've got a total view of our people, both in terms of their outcomes, in terms of performance, or whatever metrics that we're measuring that come out of our business systems, whether that's customer feedback, whether it's transaction time, whether it's about profitability, margin, whatever it happens to be. That's one side of it. What we also have is people's sense of energy, their sense of enthusiasm, their resilience, their sense of identity, their infectiousness with others, and the passion they release in others. That's another side that we can start to distill through recognition platforms like Workday, Achievers, Raw Gateway. These things probably gives another view. And then you've also got the employee listening, you've got data around people's personality types. I think over the next 5 years, we will get to a point where that data comes together into a more holistic view to enable us as individuals, as actually individual employees, to make better decisions about how we work and the motivations that get us through a day, but also help our managers think about how they serve us as employees. And I think this is not something to be seen as big brother, but as a support for servant leadership, if anybody's come across that as a phrase. What is it that I know about David as his manager that will help me help him get the most out of himself, right? And those are the things that I try to sort of see as this total talent and intelligence view is, what do I know about an individual's energy? What do I know about their skills and how I'm applying them? And what intelligence do I know about how that's coming together? And that's that sort of label. The challenge is that when it sits in individual systems, we don't often get that view. And in some respects, the skills story has been one where some of the biggest providers and the cloud HR providers have been very, very unwilling to open up their APIs, to open up their interoperability, to enable skills to be shared across silos or domains. They want to own everything. And that has created some challenges, I think, overall. But my hope is that over time, and Cornerstone have been turning the draw a little bit on this, is that people will be more open, because it's your data, right? We had an interesting conversation with the bank earlier on in the year. They said, I couldn't get much data out of the API. The provider just wasn't releasing that much data, but it's our data. We spent the last 6 months beating them up about it. Give us our data. I think that's something that has to come, but that won't come because the providers give it to you. It will come because as buyers you demand it. Hopefully that makes sense.
It does, very much so. I think we've got time for one more. I've got one more question. Another thing you mentioned from the reports is about the move from individual performance to team performance as something that's quite important. And so I guess the obvious question is, how can tech platforms provide this, both suites and specialists? What can they, what functionality can help make this change from individual to team?
It's an interesting one because a lot of this has been around for a while, but not necessarily broadly adopted. So cascading goals, cascading OKRs, having this combination of management by objective, but also management by sort of mission, if I can call it that. So the big things about where we're going to change our business, really. I think the sense of having shared goals and having those cascaded across is part of that. But one of the things that I think has been missing is the connectivity, which encourages to get together and talk about our shared goals in a constructive way. So some of the tech, as I mentioned, Weekly 10, sort of doing their reflections, that sort of surfaces it back to the manager as a large aggregation. It only takes 10 minutes just to reflect on how things are going, my blockers, my challenges. So, and it goes back to what Alberto was saying about that coach. Sometimes it's the AI can be the prompt for the question that gets me to think. If I can capture that data, then I can pass it back to others and get a stronger sense of shared value. But I think the key thing is we live in such potentially remote working environments. Ultimately, the things that deliver real value in organizations is the fact that we work together as teams. Sometimes that's a sprint, sometimes it's a hackathon, sometimes it's just day to day, getting through the day, helping each other out. I think from a practical point of view, surfacing and recognizing what's happening in the chats, recognizing what's happening in Teams and Slack, doing the prompts to follow up, keeping us honest, that's where this is starting to emerge as maybe some interesting practice that will change how we manage people in the future.
Thanks very much, David. I think that's all we've got time for. I don't think there's any more questions in the chat. So moving quickly on to the next slide. Research is just the start. Scan the QR code on your screen now to find out more about corporate membership. You'll get inside access to more detailed research, benchmark reports, private corporate roundtables, analyst time, and more. Our accelerated buying support to align stakeholders, validate solutions strategy, shortlist vendor options, so much going on there. Also to mention a special project, or rather several special projects coming up, starting now, but really accelerating in 2025, is about AI in HR talent and learning. It's a deep research project aimed to get beyond the hype and the noise, of which there is plenty, obviously, around artificial intelligence, to really get to the core of what the benefits are for HR teams and vendors, how they're realizing, everything from embracing AI innovations across the employee life cycle. So there's an opportunity to get involved with the research there. You can become a core participant, gain access to deeper research and insights beyond just the public domain deliverables, which will be appearing later next year. So do email corporate@fosway.com. Just to wrap up as well, there's obviously the full Talent People Success report. Scan the QR code to take part in HR Realities, which is currently still open. And then, as mentioned before, visit the Fosway Knowledge Centre, a new area of the site where we've kind of pulled together all of these amazing papers, the research, the 9 grids, the realities, everything, the trajectory guide, as you see down there. You can search by category, topic, media type, depending on whether you want to find infographics or talks or everything like that. So do go have a look. Just remains me to thank David. Thank you for your time. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. There will be another one along very soon, I believe Tuesday, 5th of November, last one of the year, which is going to be digital learning realities. Very exciting.
Hoping for apples.
Yes, also US election day. Very interesting.
Ooh, very explosive then.
Well, it's all going on. Yes, thanks everyone for your time, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John.